Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast of Institute of Urbanism, and my name is with me. I am Basit Ghauri, Senior Program Associate Renewables First. First of all, I welcome you to the podcast, and for today's podcast, we'll be discussing about the waste and the use of waste for the biogas production as renewable energy. So, as an energy deficient country, Pakistan needs such kind of different options to have new energy resources and new ways to produce energy, and what biogas is and how important it is in context of Pakistan being an energy deficient country, and how the waste can be converted into biogas and besides just taking it as a waste can be reused. So today we'll discuss this in details. Basit, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
For today's discussion, first of all, to begin with, I would like to ask a very basic question. What biogas is and how it is produced from the waste?
Sure. As the name suggests, the biogas, it is made of a biomethane and carbon dioxide. And we call biomethane as opposed to normal methane because it is produced from the biological processes. Right, so you are talking about organisms that helps you produce this. And in terms of the whole process, how it is actually produced, so what we do is basically we take organic matter and we put it into a digester and in an anaerobic environment. We say anaerobic, basically any environment that cuts off the oxygen supply. So that allows certain types of bacteria to thrive within that environment, and those bacteria helps digest that organic matter, and as a result they produce a gas which is known as biogas, which is predominantly methane, along with some traces of the other gases as well. So that's one of the very basic level. This is the process that is used to create the biogas.
Yeah, you have explained in detail and you mentioned the technical term organic. So I would like to know particularly what type of waste can be used to produce biogas.
Sure. So in terms of types of waste, the most common waste that we use is basically the animal manure. That includes the livestock manure, the dairy farms, the waste from the dairy farms. All of that is really very rich in organic content, and that is something that is predominantly being used here for the production of biogas facility. Other than that, we can also use the crop residues. That's also something that's being used. We can use municipal solid waste. That is the domestic and the commercial waste, the waste that's coming out from our homes and from the commercial facilities as well. Lastly, there's also wastewater treatment facilities, and at the end of the wastewater treatment facilities, we have a byproduct that is a sludge. So that could also be used to produce the biogas, because all of these have one thing in common, that they're very rich in carbon content or organic matter.
Okay, as you have mentioned that the different types, the different compositions. So how the composition affects the quality of biogas, the production of biogas?
So it affects a lot. So one thing that we need to understand is that despite all of these organic matter leading to the formulation of biogas, there's a very specific process that goes behind it. There's a very specific composition that needs to be done in order to produce a biogas in a way that is commercially viable or that can be used for the domestic purposes as well. So, for instance, there are a few of the feedstock that I talked about, like for instance animal manure. I talked about dairy. So all these are very, it takes less amount of time to produce biogas. On the other hand, there are some feedstocks like the crop residues that takes a lot of time in order to produce the same amount of biogas. So you need to make sure that the composition is sufficient. So we usually, in technical terms, we try to say carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you have to make sure it's ideal. Too much of a nitrogen or too much acid kind of like prolongs the fermentation time, the time that it takes to actually produce a biogas. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind in order to produce it.
Okay, talking about the biogas, as the world is looking for new energy resources and renewable energy resources which are green and clean. So when we talk about the biogas, how cost effective and efficient it is in comparison to the other renewable energy sources?
So I think the first thing that I would like to add is that we need to compare biogas with the other energy resources rather than renewables. And the idea why I say that is because ideally it replaces the use of natural gas, which we otherwise do, which is a fossil gas. So that's where the biogas is predominantly used. So the two things that you asked about, the cost and the emissions and efficiency. So in terms of cost, I think a typical biogas plant, depending upon what type it is, there are two types basically. One is a floating dome that's relatively cheaper. Then there is a fixed dome, which is a kind of like a fixed infrastructure within the ground that's comparatively expensive. It requires bricks and mortar work. So depending on the age, it can go from about 40,000 rupees to upward of 80,000 rupees. I'm talking about a single household level unit. So in terms of cost, it's not that expensive that it cannot be adopted, but definitely, being the main consumer of biogas are the farmers and the poultry and the livestock, grazers, all of these people. So for them, affording biogas is kind of like biogas plant is a little bit expensive. So definitely, we need interventions on that end. In terms of the actual payback period, the research that it shows is somewhere goes around 2 to 4 years, but we have to keep in mind they are replacing gas, which is already subsidized in our country. So if you give the same incentives that you give to a gas and same incentives to the biogas plant, the payback is less than a year. So it becomes very economical. So what I'm trying to say is that at a project level, it might be a little bit expensive, but for a government at an economic level, at a national level, it definitely is cheaper and better than using as an alternative to gas.
So we discussed about biogas and about its composition, its efficiency as well. Now let's talk about the Pakistan location, in the context of Pakistan. How biogas is being utilized, and if yes, and if not, then why not it is being opted as a best renewable energy source, as there's a lot of waste from the streets, and we observe that our waste just goes as a waste, not as a resource for anything. And if this happens, and if government takes such and such measures to move toward the biogas production, what are the key challenges being faced?
So in Pakistan, the idea of a biogas is not very new. I mean, 20 years back, you could have seen biogas plants out there in different suburban areas as well. The problem that Pakistan faces is that the sustenance of those models, they are not sustained. The reason being the major challenges, they pertain to the actual operations and maintenance of those biogas facilities. So, for instance, I can give you an example that if you have to make up a biogas, you have to prepare a feedstock. Therefore, say for the livestock, how do you collect that feedstock? How do you collect that manure? You have to make sure it's not just out there in the sand. You need to have put in a proper collection system. You need to make sure the pipes are cleaned regularly so that they don't choke. So these are some of the issues that kind of like fails the project itself, and at the end the result is that the facility or the technology doesn't take off at a national level. So we need to cater for these challenges as well. And above that, we also need to, as I discussed earlier as well, regarding the finances of this. So we need to put into financing mechanisms that are more affordable to the layman person, to the suburb, and to the farmers, peoples as well. So I think these are some of the challenges that needs to be focused upon.
Okay. About the policy, when it comes to the policy regulations, things are more easy to implement and easy to be adopted by the concerned departments and by the people, by the stakeholders. Now in Islamabad, as we are hearing that Capital Development Authority is going to make rainwater harvesting as a mandatory thing for every new building to be built. So what do you think, what role policy and regulations play when it comes to the promotion of biogas production and utilization of it as a renewable energy source?
Right. So I think that's one of the most crucial point here. And Pakistan's history, as we have discussed already earlier as well, is basically the idea of the policy and the idea of scaling up these renewables from the government department have been not directed rightly. So when I say not directed, because we have been more focused on developing specific projects. The idea should not be that for the policy and regulatory environment. The idea should be developing the whole value chain. So you are talking about building capacity of the people who can operate and run the plants, giving training to the layman people. We are talking about giving the standards. So in Pakistan, the typical process of making a biogas, if you have seen some facilities there, is basically what they do is they take a water tank and they cut off from the bottom of it, and then they just put it over a structure. so that biogas accumulates in it. So these are the they're very effective in localized solution, but the point is when the standards are missing, these technologies often do not work efficiently going into the future, and as a result people tend to move away from the technology. So the government and the policymaker have to realize that they don't have to install the plants. I mean, that's just one way of doing it. Instead, the focus should be on a broader perspective, on putting effort into all points along the value chain. The manufacturing of the new biogas power plants at a local level. So all of these things needs to be taken into account in the policy.
In all this, individuals and the households are the major stakeholders. So what do you think, what role or what understanding an individual need to have to be the part of it, and how as an individual or the household can they benefit from these biogas sources?
So I think first thing that we need to understand is who are the right consumers for this process. So when we talk about the biogas, we are talking about places where people have access to the amount of feedstock. So if I go home right now, I mean I'm all for the biogas purposes, but if I go home right now, I don't have enough waste to put up a biogas plant. But there are other waste to energy technologies definitely that I can use. So the composter, for instance, so I can use it to make compost and use it as a fertilizer, which is one of the major byproduct, by the way, for the biogas as well. I can do that, but when I talk about using the biogas as an alternative to natural gas, I don't have enough waste. So you are talking about specific people who have farms, who have access to that feedstock. So they can, first of all, they are the right people to target for this particular technology. And just to give you a little bit idea about how much, there was a research by the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund as well, which showed that to have a regular supply of biogas in a certain household, you need to have, from a livestock manure, you need to have same number of livestock as the same number of household members. So 10 people, you need about 10 livestock so that you can produce enough biogas in order to run complete your natural gas need. So first thing is that you need to understand that you have sufficient feedstock. Then you need to understand is basically the operation and maintenance part of it. That how are you going to, what is the composition that needs to be kept, whether you are going to completely rely on one type of feedstock or the other type of feedstock. And that's where the role of academia and role of the government is very crucial, so that they can do that kind of a research and take it to the, pass it on to the end consumer level, so that they know what kind of livestock, what kind of feedstock is needed. And talking about, this is so crucial that, even when we talk about, production from this manure facility, from manure, the biogas production from manure, just change in the feed of a cattle, the change in the feed of any dairy farm, it ends up changing the composition that requires for the optimum production of the biogas. So this whole process, although it's simple to execute, but to run it does require very specific, very thought out all processes and the composition of the feedstock that goes into the process. So we need to take into account all the operation part as well.
Alright, okay. So clearly there's nothing as waste in nature, and every type of waste can be reused, renewed, and can be utilized as a raw material of another product. Mohammed Basit Ghauri, thank you very much for being with me for this very important discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you.